Okay, let's jump right into this explainer with a number that honestly kind of blew my mind, 84.4%. That is the percentage of surveyed scuba divers who have completely broken what we are always taught is the ultimate, non-negotiable golden rule of the sport, and have gone ahead and dived completely solo. I mean, if you dive, you know the drill. You were hammered on the buddy system from day one of open water. Yet, the vast majority of divers out there are just ditching it. So, what's going on here?
Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're giving you the ultimate TLDR of a truly massive survey conducted by the Business of Diving Institute. We're going to translate their incredibly comprehensive market report, and specifically, we dug through 3 separate PDF documents filled with thousands of raw, unfiltered, open-ended answers into a clear, visual journey. We are looking directly at the psychology, the gear, and the hard statistics of diving alone, straight from the source data.
Here is our agenda for today. We'll start with the solo diving reality. Then we'll unpack the solo versus self-reliant mentality. From there, we'll look at gearing up for independence, listen to some voices on why be self-reliant, and finally, explore the allure of going solo. Okay, Section 1, the solo diving reality, breaking the buddy rule. This data absolutely shatters the always dive with a buddy dogma we just talked about. Look at this. Nearly 93% of dive instructors and 92% of tech divers have done a solo dive. And even among standard recreational divers, nearly 70% have done it. It turns out that the most experienced people in the water, the professionals, the tech experts, they are overwhelmingly the ones ditching the buddy system. So it's not just novices being reckless out there, right? It's the veterans making a highly calculated choice.
But here's where it gets incredibly relatable. Even if you're in that minority who's never officially planned a solo dive, almost 81% of survey respondents have had a buddy who basically acted like a solo diver. We're talking about that buddy who just wandered off looking at a turtle, became totally unresponsive to your hand signals, or, in worst-case scenarios, even exited the water without them. In practice, a huge portion of us have essentially been forced into a solo dive scenario, whether we signed up for it or not.
Let's move on to Section 2, solo versus self-reliant mentality, a semantic shift.
The survey highlights a really critical concept here, the self-reliant mentality. This is defined as the mindset of being completely capable of managing your own equipment, your own gas, and your own emergencies independently, even when you are diving within a team. So you are physically in the water with someone, sure, but mentally and logistically, you're completely prepared to survive alone. So the crucial takeaway is the contrast between these two practices. Solo diving is executing the dive entirely by yourself, no designated partner. But the self-reliant mentality means you have a buddy, yet you still operate as a totally independent unit. And the data shows that over 53% of respondents adopt this specific mentality when with a buddy. Why? Because a massive 73% of divers agreed that dive team integrity is incredibly fragile when people don't take personal responsibility. You know, when they just blindly rely on the group to save them.
Now, this is fascinating. When divers were asked to view their own identity in the water, on a scale from 1 representing total independence to 5 representing full team interdependence, you'd think the numbers would skew towards 5, right? Given how much the industry preaches teamwork, it would totally make sense. But no, the data surprisingly skews heavily toward the independent side. Nearly a quarter of all divers put themselves at a hard 1. They view themselves as entirely self-sufficient operators first, and team members second.
All right, Section 3. Gearing up for independence. Redundancy is key.
So how exactly do these independent divers physically prepare for the worst? Well, over 66% bring extra redundancies that they just wouldn't carry on a normal team dive. An independent gas source, we're talking like a pony bottle or twin cylinders, is the absolute non-negotiable standard, sitting at a massive 92.4%. They aren't just crossing their fingers hoping they don't run out of air, they are guaranteeing they have a backup. We also see super high numbers for carrying 2 dive computers, backup service marker buoys, and redundant lights. Basically, if one thing fails, the dive doesn't end in tragedy.
But combing through the write-in answers from those raw data PDFs was where it got really interesting. We found some delightfully specific redundancies. It really proves that self-reliance looks a little different for everyone, you know? People wrote in that they bring spare masks. Some bring mirrors so they can physically check their own rebreather bubbles, since obviously they don't have a buddy behind them to look at their back. We saw double redundant cutting devices to avoid entanglement, and even people packing a waterproof cell phone with an onshore spotter coordinating the whole thing from the beach.
Let's look at Section 4. Why be self-reliant? The chorus of voices.
Digging into the qualitative data, a really strong primary sentiment from the professional diving community starts to emerge. As many folks eloquently pointed out, If you can rescue yourself, you are no longer a liability to your team. Think about it. If you handle your own buoyancy, you track your own air, and you fix your own minor gear issues underwater, it profoundly increases the overall safety of literally everyone else in the water. You become an asset, not a burden.
Then on the practical side, specific activities, basically anything involving task loading, practically force you into a state of self-reliance by default. If you're an underwater photographer, say, staring through a macro lens at a tiny shrimp for 15 minutes straight, or maybe you're an instructor corralling 4 brand new, slightly panicky students, you are effectively diving alone anyway. Your attention is entirely consumed. That means you cannot be relied upon as a traditional buddy, and honestly, you can't rely on them either.
And then, buried in the raw data, there were these beautifully blunt, rapid-fire responses from divers who clearly just use a healthy dose of paranoia to stay alive. Quotes like, "Trust no one, trust nobody else," and "better me than a poor buddy." It really highlights a deep-seated reality for a lot of experienced divers out there. The ocean is a totally unforgiving environment, and ultimately, when the chips are down, you are the only one completely invested in your own survival.
And that brings us to Section 5, the allure of going solo, ditching the insta-buddy. So why leave the buddy on the boat entirely? Well, practically speaking, 75.1% of solo divers admit they did it simply out of logistical necessity. They wanted to dive, the ocean conditions were perfect, and they just didn't have anyone to go with. But while 3/4 of them do it for pure logistics, the survey's write-in answers reveal a much deeper, shared psychological frustration that's driving this trend. A massive theme emerged regarding the dreaded insta-buddy. You know exactly who we're talking about. The random vacation diver you get paired up with on a charter boat when you're traveling alone. Respondents repeatedly stressed that diving completely solo is actually mathematically safer than diving with an unpredictable, potentially dangerous stranger. Someone who might panic, kick up a ton of silt, or literally grab your regulator straight out of your mouth.
The sheer anonymity of the survey PDFs also brought out some fiercely honest and, I have to admit, highly entertaining tribalism. We found quotes like this one throwing some serious shade at specific dive training agencies, which really reveals the quiet prejudices out there about who is actually safe to dive with. Now, we are absolutely not taking any sides here, we're just reporting the data, but it perfectly illustrates the deep lack of trust many divers have for people trained outside of their own specific circles.
Ultimately, though, getting past the redundant gear, the safety statistics, and the agency rivalries, the data shows something very pure. For a large, quiet subculture of the dive industry, the true allure of solo diving is just the pure, uninterrupted peace of the ocean. They wrote beautifully about the serenity, the lack of pressure to accommodate someone else's pace, and the meditative quality of just being completely alone in the underwater world.
So, as we wrap up this explainer on the Business of Diving Institute's comprehensive survey, we want to leave you with a bit of a provocative thought. The next time you are gearing up on the back of a boat, really ask yourself, are you blindly relying on the person next to you to keep you safe, or are you truly ready to rely on yourself? Keep that in mind before you make your next giant stride into the deep. Thanks so much for joining us, and as always, keep exploring.